Hey friends, welcome back to the Bald Booktuber. My name is Scott. Today we're going to take a look at my top 10 favorite nonfiction titles. So recently, a comment from my friend and subscriber Rachel asked me to take a look at some nonfiction recommendations. I've been reading more nonfiction this year after a bit of a hiatus, so seems like as good a time as any. I've tried to do not repeating the same author more than once. Otherwise, the list would just be dominated by Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis. So instead, let's get a little variety in there. The subgenres of nonfiction I'll be looking at are things like autobiographies, self-help, actualization. What else do we have? Finance a little bit. So a couple things. So we'll just get into it, and we'll start with number 10, and this is an autobiography from one of my favorite authors of my youth, and been reconnecting with him this last couple of years. That's Michael Crichton, and he did an autobiography called Travels. This was published in March of 1988. I need to go back and revisit it because I remember it being great in my memory, but my memory's a little hazy because I read it a long time ago. But it talks about a little bit his life as a medical student prior to becoming a published author. It talks about some of his travels, like hiking Kilimanjaro and some other stuff. And then it talks about some of his internal travels through his mind, which I remember being a little unique at the time when I read it. So delves a little bit into psychology and those kinds of things. So yeah, I'd love to revisit it. It's very short. It's like 250 pages or something like that. So I should be able to knock that out. Many of these I probably need to revisit because I'm going by my memory and I haven't read them recently. So that was number 10. Number 9 is a book called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, 7 Steps to Everyday Genius. And this is by Michael J. Gelb, a unique individual who kind of looks at historical polymaths and people that were a genius across broad spectrums. And he's got books on Edison, he's got books on Einstein, he's got books obviously on Da Vinci. And everything I've read from him, I've really, really enjoyed. But this was the first one that I read, so this is the one I went with. This was published in October of 2009, and I think it may have been his first book. I'm not 100% sure on that. But, it talks about being intellectually curious. It talks about developing a lot of ability to kind of wade through ambiguity and these kinds of things in the process of discovering your genius. So I remember it being really, really good. I recently re-picked up the Kindle version of it, so I'll probably revisit it at some point. But yeah, I had the old paperback at one point, kind of a trade paperback edition, and I don't know what I did with it. So it's good. You should check it out. Number 8, this is the lone John C. Maxwell title on the list. He's an author I've read probably 25 or 30 books from. Big Maxwell fan. His stuff does tend to get a little repetitive. If you've read one of his books, you've read many of his books, but that's okay. This is my favorite of his books. This is the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. Live them, reach your potential. And some really good stuff in here about intentionality and about planning and different ways that you can expand your own personal development. I really enjoy this one. This is good. This was written in October of 2009. And Maxwell is still hard at work. He's still publishing books. I think he just put one out again this year or last year. So, no stop to the man. He's in his 80s now, I believe. So, yeah, I'm a big fan. That's number 8. Number 7 is a really sad, but really kind of uplifting book. And this is The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. And this was written and published just before, I think it was just before his death. It might have been right after his death, in April of 2008. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He was one of the leading experts in the world in things like artificial intelligence. And he developed pancreatic cancer that was, obviously ultimately going to be fatal. And the last lecture, you can also, see the video of it and these kinds of things, but goes into kind of some of his last messages for his students and for the world, really. He seemed like just an awesome guy that we need more of and not less of. I remember parts of it. Obviously, I don't have perfect recall of everything that he talked about, but he just sounded like someone you wanted to be a student to. And that is another one I wouldn't mind revisiting, both the lecture on video and the book itself. All right, that takes us to number 6. This will be the Michael Lewis portion of the program here. He's one of my favorite writers. He's just really good at storytelling, which is a big thing for me when it comes to nonfiction. Keeps things interesting and fresh. I had a couple of options here, several options, because everything I've read of his is great, but I went with The Big Short. I also could have gone with Moneyball, but me and baseball are on a bit of a break right now. We're not getting along real well, so I went with The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine. This obviously has had a movie adapted for it, and I like the movie as well. So this was May of 2010, after kind of the financial crash and all that stuff in 2008. Talks a little bit about, some of the not great securities that were created and weren't properly tended, that led to the financial crash, like mortgage-backed securities and these kinds of things. And I would definitely recommend the movie as well. I thought it was really well done. So, good book. Check it out. All right, that takes us to our top 5. The top 5 is going to start with Stephen King, and this is On Writing a Memoir of the Craft. So this was October of 2000. Man, I can't believe it's been that long ago. If you're looking for a book to teach you how to write, I don't think this is the one. But he does do a really good job of kind of talking about his writing life and about what led him wanting to be a writer and his childhood, and how the events of his accident have impacted him. I really enjoy it. I've revisited it a few times. It's something I have on audio, and I have the Kindle version, so I've it's kind of switched back and forth between reading and listening to it. Really good. Not much to say other than this is not an instruction manual. So if you're looking for a good way to become a better writer, I don't know that this is the one. He is very famously what's called a discovery writer. Some people call that a gardener. That's kind of George R. R. Martin's term. So he discovers the things as he writes them. He doesn't have a plan going in like a plotter or a architect would. So he kind of goes wherever the story tells him to go. He talks in the book about it being like digging up fossils. That's kind of his metaphor. So there are these fossils in the ground that he has to dig up and polish up and present in story form, which is a very strange metaphor, but it works for him. So he talks in there about, maybe you don't believe that this is what I'm saying is true, but you need to at least believe that I believe it. So it's interesting. It's weird, just like most things Stephen King. All right, let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is my Jim Collins title on here. I like Jim Collins. He's a researcher and author that I really enjoy. he and his team look into companies. So there were a few choices here, but I went with How the Mighty Fall and Why Some Companies Never Give In. Kind of his breakthroughs were Built to Last and Good to Great, and both are fantastic. There's another more recent one called Great by Choice that's also fantastic. But the kind of inner pessimist in me is interested in this one. This one's my favorite, How the Mighty Fall. So this was written in September of 2011. So again, from a timing standpoint, it made sense to write this book with companies going under and a bunch of mergers and acquisitions and all that kind of stuff going on at that time while the financial world was a bit in turmoil. But it talks a lot about hubris and about how some companies, they have this momentous climb to really greatness, and then it just falls off. And it has a lot to do with they kind of take their eye off the ball. They just assume that whatever has gotten them to there will always be relevant into the case. So it's got examples like, if I remember right, Motorola, where, I don't remember if BlackBerry is in there as well, but just companies that didn't see the iPhone and the changes that would happen when it comes to smartphone technology. Those were some of the examples. I'm certain Blockbuster Video would have been in there at some point. I think he took a look at, I think it was, I want to say 7 or 8 companies that just had these meteoric rises and then just dropped off of the face of the earth because of hubris and because of people not tending the garden well and looking to the future. So I really like it. It's another one I'd like to revisit at some point. That takes us to our top 3. Number 3 is a bit of a corny choice, but it's my choice, so it's my list. I can do whatever I want. This is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. This is March of 1989. I read this for the first time in my 20s when I became a people leader for the first time at my company. My boss at the time said, we're all going to read this together. It was extremely meaningful to him. It's extremely meaningful to me. I've revisited a few times. There are parts that are dry. There are parts that are dull, certainly. But ultimately, I think it's something that most people should read at least once in their lifetimes. I think there's some very good advice in there. Still to this day, the one that most sticks with me is seek first to understand, then to be understood. See things from other people's points of view. Make sure that you're not kind of listening with an intent to respond, but rather listening with an intent to understand. I think there's a lot of valuable stuff in there. Sharpen the Saw is one of the chapters about always making yourself better, making sure tomorrow's better than today. I just think there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's why it's high on my list. People will think it's kind of cringy, I guess, that it's on the list, but hey, what are you going to do? If you haven't read it, I would check it out at some point. All right, number 2 I read a couple years ago, and this is Educated, a memoir. This is by Tara Westover. I still have the hardcover, I guess, over there somewhere. This is fantastic. And February 2018 is when it got published. It is harrowing what this woman has been through. She grew up as a member of a family that their parents were survivalists in Montana. So in other words, basically built bunkers and prepared for the end of the world because the end of the world was coming. And their parents basically separated them from the known world, didn't allow them to go to school, didn't really teach them much about the real world. And it's about kind of her journey for kind of self-discovery and understanding and having a place in the world. So she fought tooth and nail to become educated, and she went to was it Harvard and Oxford, I believe, both, and has degrees from both. there is a scene in the chapter where she's at, and I can't remember which university it is. I can't remember if at that point it was Harvard or something else. But she's reading aloud in the classroom, and she stops everything and she asks the professor, "What is this word? I've never seen this word before." And just dead silence from everyone. The word was Holocaust. She'd never been educated about the Holocaust. She had no understanding of what had befallen the Jewish people and others in that terrible event. She didn't know that Hitler was a terrible person that existed in history. None of this had ever been taught to her. She'd never read it. Nothing in the limited books in her parents' house would have had any indication of it. So it's this terrible, terrible scene where it seems like everyone in that room believed that she was making fun of this horrible event, the people that had to go through it and still, have family members and stuff impacted. Maybe they themselves were impacted at one point. Just really, really hit me hard, and that one stands out in my mind. But fantastic book. I would highly, highly encourage you to read it. It is one of my favorites. Really good. And that takes us to number one. And, there was only one choice for number one. This is my favorite nonfiction book ever. And this is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, published in 2008. Man, it's been 14 years for this too. Goodness. As with most things with Malcolm Gladwell, he's telling a story. And there is research behind it. But, no one can make the claim, and he doesn't make the claim that it's rigorous, double-blind tested, stuff like that. Like, that's just not what he does. He is a bit of a sociologist in training, but he's not super scientific about it. So when he talks about things like the 10,000 hour rule, how the best in every field have invested at least 10,000 hours of training into something to become great at it. That's just him making some broad assumptions based on people he has admired and witnessed. It's not saying that you have to have 10,000 hours in to be good at something. That's not what his point was. I probably like this more than most people because the examples of the people in it are people that I love, like the Beatles, and you got your computer mavens like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and stuff like that. So he's got people that I'm interested in learning more about. So those are his examples in this book. It also talks about people I've never heard of and kind of tying them together, like these lawyers in New York that put in their 10,000 hours and stuff like that. So this is one I'll definitely revisit, but it just has had a lasting impact on me, and that's why it's my number one. So that's my top 10, my friends. I would love to hear some of your favorite nonfiction titles. I know that I have been a little bit non-diligent lately about mixing in the nonfiction, but this year's been better. I think I've had, somewhere between 5 and 10 nonfiction books I've read this year. I'm doing them mostly on audio, but that's okay. That's how I learn. I'm actually listening to another Adam Grant right now called Give and Take, so I'm enjoying it. So please let me know what some of your favorite nonfiction is, and until next time, publication order always, my friend.